who made this film, and she has a beautiful sense of the images and the graphics, but mostly it's the sense of what do we do with the mainstream art world today? It's so dehumanized. It doesn't seem like the art we see when we go to a museum, even a modern museum, because performance art has gone off into left field, and I don't get it anymore. Oh, Steve, you have your better self there with you too, I see. Yeah. So this film knocked me out when I first saw it. Yeah?
I don't think I'd analogize this really to performance art because he's given no role. He's a canvas.
You know, you're right, Steve. What I meant was that usually films about the contemporary art world are offbeat. They're not really filled with substance. They're abstract. And the director and writer of this film did a great job of bringing it down to a human scale, because it's really all about what is a human being? What is their value? And it takes a very circuitous route to get to the conclusion of the film, which is ultimately very warm and humanistic, I found. And I was so glad she went there with it, because I was guarded when I almost didn't watch this the first time I saw it, because I thought, oh, it'd be just sarcastic and negative, and, you know, the equivalent of the inconvenient truth for the art world. But it wasn't. It was a great story and very funny if you choose to look at it that way. So I don't have any particular purpose with it for our discussion, other than to say, let's talk it through from the very beginning, and talk about the people, because ultimately it's about people, right? It's about the individual and the meaning and the value of an individual. So what did you think of him in the beginning? You saw him thrown into jail before you saw anything else. And before that, you saw him with his kitty cat. Did we have any biases or suspicions about who he was in the very beginning, in the opening scenes of the film? I guess we had none. Okay. Then let's go back to the very opening scene, which is the shot with multiple mirrors, right? In white, with a white background. And this shot is a very skillful manipulation of our mindset, because we think we're looking at a real image. And it turns out the two men carrying this object, which turns out to be a painting, are a reflection. And we see them come into our field of view. And then it turns out, no, that was another mirror and a second mirror. So the reality happens in the third realization of the image. And I found this to be funny and smart and also very poignant, because we see lots of mirrors and multiple images throughout the film. But what it's signaling to us is that nothing is what it seems to be. And if I can jump ahead just conceptually, and her theme is human beings are overlooked, right? And we're not seeing the human being that's really there. And if you think about that in relationship to the whole film, I think that's the essence of it. So I thought that scene with the mirrors and the white and hanging on the wall and revealing the tattoo, we're not quite sure it's a piece of skin, although the camera does move in on it at the end. And again, this is the gaze of the artist who's created it, because we only see him from we saw him come in, I think, his face, but then the hanging on the wall is from the back of his head, and the image is on in the background behind him.
And Jim, I think that initial scene was meant to really mislead and fool us during most of the rest of the movie. We were expecting it to be his actual skin that was being pre-seen on the wall. And we're actually kind of relieved and pleased to find out it wasn't.
Right. Thank you for killing the ending for us.
Everybody's seen the movie.
Yeah, everybody's seen the movie, but it's like, that's the trick. And we've seen this in other films before, where an image up front is revealed at the end for its true meaning, you know, which encapsulates the whole film.
Mr. Ruxin, may I comment on the film?
Of course.
I think it's if you're going to become a major league celebrity, a great way to fake your death. The only part I didn't like was when he scared the people in the museum, although he never had a bomb. But
Okay,
I
that's
want,
a little too.
I wouldn't
Donna,
like
it's a
that.
little too far ahead.
Okay,
But
I don't like.
please chime in later.
All right.
See, the ending of a film like this is very delicate because it's all about what we're primed to feel. And we want to like sneak up on that feeling to make sure we all are on board with it. I didn't know what to think. I thought the guy was, where do we go? We go, he gets freed from jail because his jailer's a cousin. So this tells us something about the Syrian oppression.
I didn't get that.
Right, the very early scene where he says, he opens this screen and he allows the cousin to flee. And then he goes back to the woman's house to see her. He's arrested because he said, let's have a revolution. I love this woman. I want to marry her. And of course, Bashar al-Assad and his henchmen got wind of this and they arrested him. So this takes place in contemporary Syria, which is as vicious and nasty a regime of oppression as we've seen. Remember, Bashar gassed his own people. And for many people on either side of our political spectrum here in the States, that was a watershed event because we had always said using chemical weapons is a violation of the Geneva Convention and the ultimate assault upon humanity, worthy of the most severe retaliation. And Assad did not get the most severe retaliation. He got a bunch of ships in the Mediterranean Sea burning what was supposed to be the remainder of the chemical weapons. And I don't want to get too political with tonight. It's ultimately a very political movie, but it's not about politics. It's about humanity. And
I think it was about.
But this was a very nasty regime. I think we all have to agree on that. Yeah, Fern?
I think Jerry Rabel wants to speak. Yes, Jerry? No. Okay.
No,
But
he's just waving at you, Fern.
Hi.
You and his wife go way back. You should
Yeah.
know that.
I think that it is a very political movie.
It is, but I don't want that to get in the way of us in the beginning of the discussion. If you could save it, there's so much room for that. It's extremely political.
Yes. Melissa, unmute yourself.
Yeah, I think just in terms of how they set it up, I mean, it's very obvious that the politics gets in the way, but I think what's really interesting about it is they make him so simple. They really simplify him down to something that anybody can understand. His love.
Well, and what is that, Melissa? Identify that.
I mean, I feel like the thing that you really know about him is how much he loves this woman.
Right.
And I think no matter who you are, you can understand that. So, if that's the central detail they want us to focus on, it really simplifies his life. And when it becomes complicated, you understand that outside forces are coming in, but he himself, there's so much about him that is really simplified in how they set it up. And I think, in fact, so much of the movie, I feel like he's shot almost as if he's alone for the whole movie. So, it's like this feeling is the driving force for him. And it's a feeling that I think anybody can understand.
Yeah. It's
regardless
love.
of where they're from.
Mm-hmm. Love.
I would like to tie in on what Melissa just said is strictly related to what she just said, if I may.
You may.
You said about his love for the woman. I was surprised because of this intense relationship and what each has done by their acts to be able to come together again. But yet the scenes between them left me cold. They didn't seem to have, when they were together, they didn't seem to have any chemistry. I didn't see any.
Why was that? Why do you think that was?
Well, because of the constraints of the environment, perhaps. But it left me wondering. It seemed strained to me, and I don't know if anyone else felt that or not.
Remember, on the train, he starts to put his arm around her back, and she says, "Watch out! Someone may know my family."
But
They
that,
are
that
operating under constraints.
but that was because they were in a public situation or whatever. But even when they are later on, just the two of them, or when he comes back and encounters her in the hall, you know, later on, and she drops the bag, yes, but it just, I don't know. For those in that situation, it lacked the passion that I thought would also be there.
A
Okay.
few people, Steve Greenberg, and then Mona, and then Howard.
Yeah,
And then Jeffrey.
I thought in that scene on the train or bus or whatever it was, I guess it was a train, that the passengers wound up serenading them. It was almost a romantic comedy out of a 30s sitcom. But before we get too far from the beginning, I wanted to follow up on what Jim said, that I was very intrigued stylistically. The visual beginning that Jim was talking about was images of an image, of this image that of his back that was going to be the central MacGuffin of the whole movie. And I thought it was very clever to say, well, here we are, we're looking at images and which one is real, and it's an image of an image. Right. So it introduced the style or the theme of the film emotionally, very visually at the beginning.
Right. I'm glad you brought that back up, because it's very important. Things are seldom what they seem, and that's what the reflections and the dual images always
I
have.
totally agree.
You know, and it's so artful. And I mean, I'm very impressed with this director anyway, but that was a big part of it. She managed to weave this kind of undermining, subversive look at everything throughout the whole film. Everything was in question, yet his love, as Melissa pointed out, was not in question. This was our rock as an audience. Because remember, he knew that it was an oppressive environment. He knew, you know, touching her shoulder was not quite cool. It's a Muslim world, and the, you know, strict religious enforcement, and yet he transgresses willingly in public. And you saw people taking their cell phones out to record his declaration of love for her on the train. And that was very brave of him. So that alone, if we talk about action establishing character, that was enough to push us through the whole film, because we knew he still loved her and always would. Even though he claimed, I mean, this was kind of cute. I'll flash forward a little bit. Soraya, the blonde henchwoman of Joffrey or Godfrey, he claims she's his girlfriend. Of course, she isn't and wouldn't be. That was kind of funny that he's grasping at straws, and the only woman he's close to is her, who's like the henchman. What would we call that? The lieutenant who, like, you know, drags him to hell, only she's really thinking of his best interests. So constraints are very much a part of the world, and he was very conscious of it, being a very political time, fraught, and protesters who said, let's have a revolution. He meant a romantic revolution. But of course, the stupids in the Bashar al-Assad regime thought, oh, it would take them literally. You know, it's like the Red Scare here in this country, or any fascist regime. They'll nail you on your words, not on your intentions. You know, and his intention was just totally, I mean, look, she's a beautiful woman. She's smitten with him. He's smitten with her. What's wrong with this? This is Romeo and Juliet, divided by a wall. And this is classical English literature romance, where the two lovers are separated by a wall, whether it's Pyramus and Thisbe, or who are the ones who go down into hell? Those lovers. What? Orpheus and Eurydice. Thank you, Mona. I knew I could rely on you. You know, it's like there's always a problem. How do we get the two lovers together? Down in the Valley in American musicals, and you know, Oklahoma. It's always about how the two lovers get together. South Pacific. We recognize it as a trope, but it's so fresh because who's seen a Belgian, Syrian, Lebanese movie before? You know, there's probably never been one. So it has this really fresh feel to it, but it gives him a certain authenticity to say, we know what's driving him. His allegiances are never questioned. So thank you, Steve.
Mona has the floor, then Howard, then Jeff.
I just wanted to let Frank know that Steve and I thought there was tremendous chemistry between the two leads. And Sam was reckless and irresponsible.
Yeah.
And so every time they got together, there's this huge obstacle. She's married. And he refused to empathize even to the slightest extent with why she might have done that. So I think conflict between them was absolutely inevitable because he's existing in this plane where somehow she should never have, given into the demands of her family or her own desire to escape a war-torn, dangerous country, or whatever it was that motivated her to leave. And the guy who played her husband, that smug, arrogant, satisfied diplomat, boy, he was so good.
He got to you.
After thinking about all of the, I really thought it was a very interesting movie, very conceptual and really attacking so many different things. But I realized later that I thought the one who gave an absolutely stupendous performance was Monica Bellucci as the artist's assistant.
Yeah, that's Soraya.
Soraya, who's mediating all of these situations and relieving the artist from having to live in a practical world and deal with insurance and deal with the government and deal with the bureaucracy, et cetera, et cetera. And I ended up being very curious about her background. Steve and I disagreed because I thought there were a few places in the movie where she speaks Arabic to Sam.
Maybe. Let me ask you this, Mona. Did you ever question her motivation? Could she have gone one way or the other with him? Was she evil? Was she manipulative? Or was she really concerned about his welfare? I went back and forth, which I thought was good.
Are you talking about Soraya?
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I thought she was getting hit from so many different directions. But I thought initially when she offered him food at the end of the gallery opening, and he said, well, I don't take this the wrong way, but F you. She actually, I think, had gone out of her way to be kind to people that she could simply have had thrown out.
Yeah. Let's remember, I'm glad you brought up the gallery scenes because he fled because he knew the authorities were after him. So he fled, his sister helps him get across the border. And then he's just, he's sexing chickens, which is kind of funny in itself. And then there's that shot where they put the chick under a scanner, in a way that's like, oh, was the customs authority going to scan his back to make sure he was legal? It's just a little hint of what's to come. And an example of our computerization of humanity or life in terms of the chicken. And so he's just this refugee who had to flee the woman he loved because of duress, political duress. And that's what he's doing there. And he only is called to the attention of, what's the artist's first name again? I keep saying Joffre. David?
Godfrey.
No. Is it Godfrey? No, that's his last name. His first name is...
Oh.
I usually write it down, but I didn't. Okay.
Jeffrey Godfrey.
Jeffrey Godfrey? Oh, right.
Thank you, Melissa.
Okay, thank you. So they have a beer together, and he said, no, wait, come talk to me. And I got the feeling, tell me if you did, that this project had been on Jeffrey's mind before this, and that he was just looking for a vulnerable, weak, needy person who would say yes to this. Now, I'm not saying he was a predator, because if you look at the terms of the contract he had his lawyer draw up, very generous. It was a very unexploitative contract. He even had time off. He just had to be there for certain events. And did anybody else have that feeling? Was it a seduction or just an honest business deal? I think Yvette has something to say.
You're muted, Yvette.
Frank, okay.
I'll get back to you, Howard and Jeffrey.
I agree with you, Jim. I think he really was trying to think of a new way of art and was thinking about this, and this guy showed up who was just the perfect candidate for what he was looking for. And the offer was very generous, so
Yeah.
it was not taking advantage of him at all.
Yeah. He knew it might be considered as prey, dehumanizing, but he set it up so that it wouldn't be. Yeah, you're muted.
All right, so Howard, Jeff, and Sandy.
Okay, Howard.
I actually, my first impression from the beginning of the movie was not just that the protagonist was presented as being someone who was presented in a very simple way. It was very simple-minded, and I found it impossible to actually believe in his character, because who lives in Syria and jumps up and says, let's have a revolution in front of a bunch of strangers? I don't know how old he was when that was supposed to have happened, but he would never have survived to the age of 12 if he was such a simple-minded person.
You're so right. He's portrayed simplistically, although he
demonstrates simplistically. He's a simple mind. He's Gimple the Fool. He's really.
Yeah, but look at how he manipulates the
Dodo.
system. He manipulates the system throughout the movie.
He
gets us. Oh, he takes control a lot of the time. He arranges for the museum to forgive Ziad for the damage of the $11 million painting.
Because his girlfriend told him to, right? Or because, yeah.
Well,
told him to.
But he is an agent of his own. He wasn't a victim of her demand. I think he's being a mensch by doing that in some way. Maybe
mensch would be the last word I would use for this guy. This guy.
But here,
I mean, what if somebody offered someone, I'll give you $100,000 to be a prostitute? It's a very generous offer.
I think you have to watch the Squid Game before we proceed with this discussion.
I will never watch the Squid Game.
Why? It's a humanistic tale of human desperation.
I've read and heard enough about it to know that it's
I knew that would be provocative. But
I watched it.
Okay, one more thing, Sandy, and then we'll go with you. I think, Howard, we said this before, you can't let reality interfere with a good movie's premises. You have to accept the terms of the movie, that this passionate guy is worthy of your attention. Now, maybe he didn't earn it and you're allowed your opinion, but if you can't accept that he was worthy of love and worthy of giving love and didn't believe that that love was a value, a human value to be cherished, then I can't explain the movie for you. If he failed as a character for you, then the movie failed.
I mean, even his love, he was very wrapped up with his girlfriend, even to the extent that he forgot that she was married. But
no, he didn't forget she was married. He was trying to overcome the fact that she was married.
He didn't care that she was married. He was going to go and get her.
Oh, well, let me.
His own mother, he suddenly had a flash of insight that he'd been talking about his mother was living in a war zone and never asked her how she was doing. Didn't even know she'd been injured.
We all have been obsessed with ourselves at the detriment of relatives and not paid enough attention to them. I thought that was a very human moment. He's admitting to his mother, whom he loves, I was obsessed with myself and I neglected you and I feel terrible about it. At least she was still alive at that point. But the point is, you have to, it's fine if you didn't engage with him, but try, and when you hit a point like that in a movie where you're not connected, try and see it through more intellectually and overcome your objections, and to say, well, if the movie expects me to accept this, then I'm going to examine the rest of its authenticity. There's something there to be had. And I don't want you to miss that, because you hit this roadblock early on with him.
Or maybe it's just a badly crafted movie.
Well, for you, the beginning was badly crafted because they didn't win him over to you. But, maybe it's been too many decades since we were passionate young men who were head over heels over a woman and just couldn't wait to get to her.
So Jeffrey would like to comment, but before he does, I just want to, apropos of what you're discussing, Steve put in the chat that maybe that feeling of not winning him over, but Steve thought that the actor who played Sam was the weakest actor, and his simpleness was partly the result of his inability to show subtext. That was Steve's response to perhaps to what
Well,
Howard.
it's a great response, Steve. And I just would like to answer it while Sandy's cat waves
Sorry.
her tail in there.
Well, Jeffrey's next and then Sandy.
Oh, okay, I'll come back in later. Jeffrey, where are you?
I'm here. I really wasn't, I didn't have my hand up, but I will say that I think that there's a trajectory of kind of the commodization of human beings in this film where he is, when he's working with the chickens, and it's almost like an assembly line kind of process, and dealing with the chickens as almost inhumane way, and then he himself becomes a commodity, and human. That's kind of a comment on society, I think, and the way in which we have become kind of commodities in the society, and only the trajectory at the end is where he discovers again his kind of humanity.
Yeah, don't go there. Yeah, you're right. I totally agree. Remember, he's where I was headed before was he's a desperate refugee. He needs money. He needs food, which is why he goes to these exhibitions where there's food, for free. And that's where he gets, I don't want to say entrapped, but where Jeffrey believes that this is the right guy for the role I had in mind for him. I think that his simplicity, you can say he's simple-minded or it's a simple performance. I think he did what was needed because I followed him. I understood his motivations with every expression, his ups and his downs, his anger at Ziad, his warmth to his mother, to Abir. The guy had a range of emotion. He wasn't just a total one-note kind of performer or character. I think he did a lot through the film to warm us up to him, but it took some patience, so I understand that.
So Sandy and then Yvette.
So when I raised my hand, it was actually several subjects ago.
That's okay.
So there are a couple of things I want to comment on. First of all, toward the beginning, when he's on the bus, I guess, with his girlfriend, and he makes this public show of wanting a revolution, and then you see people with their cameras filming him. I think that's what caused him to be arrested. I mean, that was not something that was allowed. So that was kind of stupid, I thought, on his part, and he wouldn't see that would happen. But
Sandy, before you leave that subject, just want to comment. People seem to do that all the time on social media. They take pictures of themselves storming the Capitol, and then they get arrested and go to jail. They take pictures of themselves robbing something, and they're surprised when the police show up. I mean, so it's not unreal. It's stupid, but
right, exactly.
Totally agree.
But then we're talking about Jeffrey and what he did. This piece of artwork he did. There was some comment that made me think that he had done this before, because there was some talk about him being a world-renowned tattoo artist or something like that. And I thought that meant that he had done something like this before. And he found this new canvas to, again, perfect his tattoo art on. But I thought this was not the first time he had done this. That was my impression.
By the way, the film was based upon an actual artist who did a tattoo. It's credited at the end of the film. I don't know anything about it. I didn't research it. But there is a moment, I think, when we go through a previous exhibit of Jeffrey's, and it's very bizarre. And it's sort of an eye onto Jeffrey, who he is, that he's a conceptual artist. He's not a graphic artist.
Right. Yeah, I agree.
Yvette, unmute. Yvette, you're muted.
You were talking about Sam's personality. I think he showed interest in his family by sending so much money to them, which they thanked him for. And helped his husband opened a restaurant. So he cared, but he just didn't take the time to talk to the mother, which was wrong, no doubt about it. But in the meanwhile, he was giving them sustenance. He wasn't just keeping all the money for himself.
I mean, that's a humanizing aspect of Sam, but I think we can't expect too much sophistication from him because he swallows this scheme at the same time. The man is totally in touch with his sincerity and his real needs. He seldom does anything that's outside of his own interests, even when he asked the museum to forgive Ziad the damage to the painting. So
I have a
in a
comment.
way, let me finish, Fern. One thing.
Sorry.
In a way, it's okay if Sam strikes us as simple, because in the words of some other religion, it's how we think of the least of us that makes us human and dignified. So let him be a simple man, but he's expressing some very fundamental human feelings.
While we have the screen here.
Just a moment, Frank. Frank, just a moment, please.
Sure.
Just, thank you. I just was struck by Yvette's comment about his calling his mom, and thinking, when I watched it, it occurred to me that refugees are entirely different these days than refugees used to be. That when people left their families and went to another country, they never saw them again. Now refugees, they leave, but they come and they're separated for forever, for years, but they communicate with each other. They have Sunday phone calls. They can speak to each other on WhatsApp for free. It's a very different refugee experience that we see in this movie. And I found it very striking because my own family's refugees, and when you left, that was it. They still have a difficult journey, but it's a different journey.
I wanted to add that the question about wasn't it a foolish thing for him to suggest a revolution, even in jest, on the train. I guess that was to show his reckless abandon. Is so enthralled with, in love with this woman who just has indicated to him that she is in love with him also. But also the comments about how uninformed or simple he seems to be. The film does not, it's outside the perimeter of it. We don't know what he did before. We don't know what his life was like before. He's a blank slate as far as that goes. So that's kind of interesting. We have to go with what we have.
Well, what we have, judge him by his actions, because
Right.
all we know of him is what he does.
Right.
And that is actually a fundamental of great drama. It's not about the talk. It's about what does he tell us about his character through his actions.
Right.
Okay. Is there anyone else who wants to?
I think Natalie. Unmute, Natalie.
First, Jim, I want to talk about the chicken scene.
Okay.
Because opposite to what you said, in fact, that chicken scene was in that movie that almost won the Academy Award for the foreign film. Is it, I forget the name, Minerva, it begins with an
Minari.
M. Minari.
Minari, yeah.
And they are in the chicken farm there too. And they're counting the chickens, and they are Korean people who have left their country. And I didn't think this was funny at all. I thought it was an example of the desperation of what people have to do for their work when they are poor and they are immigrants and they have nothing else to do. So that's number one. And number two, aside from what was going on, I loved the movie. It was a very emotional movie for me to watch as well. Was that they were making fun of the absurdity of the art world, which we all know that you go into exhibits where artists are making more and more strange, absurd, at least to my opinion, all these bright colors flying all over the place with more and more, it gets white on white, black on black. And I think that that was a theme in the movie as well, that these people could spend $5 million to take him home was to that extreme. Plus, there was a lot in the film for me also about the horrors of the Syrian war that these two people were involved in. When she was wealthy, he was poor. Yeah, they loved each other, that whole other scene. But these were important aspects of the film as well that I think is important to talk about. And remember, his mother gets smashed. He says, "Oh, Mom, I didn't know your legs were bombed up," in the movie.
Yeah. That's later. I think you're right. The context of the whole film is a human abomination happening in Syria. And it's interesting that Abir and Zaid are victims to an extent, not as much as Sam is, but she flees just because her family said, leave with the guy. He's going to get you out of here. It's going to all fall apart soon. So she takes it, it's this patriarchal world, and he works in the embassy, the Syrian embassy in Belgium. It's far safer than any place in Syria. So she goes. It's like everybody's forced to do something they don't want to do. And that desperation sort of sets the framework for his selling his back to the artist and her selling her virginity and her life to Zaid. It's like people do what they have to do to survive.
Right.
And that is as desperate as anything we've seen in the Holocaust. It's just happening today. And that's a very exciting part of this film, that it shows the human desperation behind these moves.
Right.
And I totally agree with you on that.
LaDonna, did you have something you wanted to add?
I disagree, with Mr. Ruxin, with Jim and you. I think you're just amazing of the humanity of this. But when he called his mother, and then the time and the era with the refugees and the country that they're in, and relating to the Holocaust, people do what they have to do to survive. I just totally agree.
Yeah, they do. So this is the mental context of the individual in a time of crisis. I'm so desperate, I have to do something to save myself and then save people close to me. And for him, without being with Abir, life was meaningful. So he's on this desperate pursuit. He tracks her down. He finds her apartment. He's determined to insinuate himself into her life in the off chance that there's a way of him getting her back. So ultimately, it's a love story. It's a love pursuit story. And it's very human and very simple. So I forgive it for that simplicity. But the complications that come to it are all about the art world and commerce and the politics involved. I think Jeffrey has something to say.
Yes, he does. Unmute yourself, Jeff. Jeff, unmute yourself.
I am. I don't see him quite as the simple individual that people are painting him. There are two scenes that come to mind. One of the scenes is when he gets off the podium and he tries talking to the little children, and they tell him to go back. You're an object. Go back and sit down.
He's frozen on us. Go ahead.
He's frozen. Jeff, you're frozen. Let me get back to you.
Yeah, what Jeff is referencing is when the girls ask this question about do all tourists need to have a tattoo on their backs? And he comes off the podium and tries to talk to her, and the usher or handler pushes him back, says, no, you can't interact. That's another act of dehumanization where, no, you're a piece of art hanging on the wall. You're not a person who gets to interact with your fans. He even uses the term fans. Can't I talk to my fans? So he's even denied any of the good stuff that might come from the celebrity. It's just one more attack on his humanity. Is Jeff with us?
Jeff, are you able to speak now?
No, they went black.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Speak up.
No.
Is when he's in that place and he's the other person demands that he shows him the tattoo, and he gets very angry to show the friends the tattoo.
Right. That's his good friend at the chicken sexing factory.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yeah, we heard that.
Okay. So the other scene I'm referring to is when the friend demands that he show the tattoo to the other people, and he gets extremely agitated at it because he doesn't want to be treated as an object.
Right.
So I think he's much more complex than people are making him out.
He is. I'm sorry we got off the rails on that, but I wanted to pursue it because I don't think it's an issue. You either feel him or you don't. And if you don't, the movies may be lost on you.
Art, unmute.
What's interesting is that the tattoo is of a Schengen visa, which gives people the most freedom in Europe and 26 nations to travel on short-term basis for 90 days without any other restrictions. It's unique in Europe. And I believe there's some greater meaning in the fact that the tattoo was such a visa. He has many restrictions placed on him by the artist, but yet he has this free time for himself. He simply needs to appear every 30 days for an exhibit. And actually, a Schengen visa would allow him 30 days in many countries. If it were a piece of paper, I don't know whether it qualified, but it was on his back.
Think of the Schengen visa as added value. It makes his back even more valuable than just an ordinary passport, because he can go anywhere. So it's very clever. And how they arranged it, I don't know if it's a legitimate visa or not. But it almost doesn't matter because it's a whole joke on the art establishment, isn't it? That we create meaning. It's not like this has inherent value. You know, the popular pursuit of this is what makes it valuable, not anything inherent. And of course, the sucker, you know, the tall man with a short wife who's 20 years older than he is, you know, with a phony white tuxedo. I mean, that's a hilarious profile. Because these people are clearly, it's like the guy Sterling in Los Angeles who, you know, had the girlfriend and the basketball scandal and, you know, the building on Wilshire Boulevard with the gold letters. It's such a joke. These people create their own meaning for their own personas because they have money. And that's what Jeffrey is aiming this art at, to point the finger at the whole world saying, you fools, you tolerate this nonsense, because that's all it is. So I think that's hilarious. And then it goes for auction and it sells for even more. It sells for $5 million.
We have three people who'd like to speak. Frank, Melissa, and then Sandy.
A striking scene to me, which is on this plane of object versus humanity, when he goes into the museum gift shop, there is his back on a t-shirt, yet it shows no reaction. There was no, you know, at all. He evidently bought one or was given one, because in later scenes, he's wearing it himself, I guess, to cover the real tattoo until it's to be exposed.
Despite the director's decisive hand at showing things, I think she passed on that opportunity because it would have been too obvious. You know, he walks on the other side of it. You know, that was for our enjoyment, you know, in the gift shop.
But when your own body becomes an object for
Right,
part of a
absolutely. That's the
sale
point of it.
for a gift shop.
And then he wears it because he's beginning to embrace it,
Yeah.
because by his wearing that T-shirt, Frank, he's saying, I'll go along with this thing. I'm going to play this to the hilt.
Sure.
And he does. So, there's a personality, a wise man coming out of this, realizing how to exploit his weaknesses. His weakness was poverty and desperation, and he was lovelorn. And this author says, hey, I'll give you a tool. You may not realize what it is, but you're going to be better off for embracing it. And the tool is to sell me the rights to tattooing your back. It's so brilliant. Because if Jeffrey, the artist, is the magician. He's the sorcerer, who controls the apprentice. He plays all the cards. He has all the power because he has the contract. But within the contract, then it's Sam's world, and Sam figures out how to play the role he's bargained for himself.
Talk about playing a role. Another aspect that struck me was that flowing blue robe.
The robe. Oh my God.
Between showings, he's that's the hint. The
Okay,
artistic.
what did that mean to you? I'll save it.
Melissa, I see you. You can put your hand down. You're next.
Are you? Oh, you're asking me, Jim, what it meant to me?
Well, Fern recognized somebody.
Oh,
That's okay. Frank, go ahead and finish. Melissa.
No, go on with the robe. What did the robe mean to you, and how did it function?
Well, I thought that the robe was the hand of the artist, making him more flowing. That's the artsy part of it. That's all, making him more of a celebrity. It reminded me of like the boxers have those fancy robes that come into the ring with. It's show. It's showmanship.
Yeah, it's flamboyance, and it kind of worked in several ways for me. It's like this guy, Sam, would never wear anything like that in real life. If you think of him on the train when you saw him, but here he is gliding through these ornate marble columns in the museum with his flowing robe. It's, he could be Liberace, for that matter. It's very
Right.
fey. Excuse me if I offend anybody, but that's the point, is that he is beginning to manipulate. He accepts the world he's bought into and then learns how to manipulate it with the tools. Very funny. I have several notes about that robe, and it's used and it's flowing and glowing and bouncing back light to the camera. It's magic. And it's like he's been elevated from this ordinary lower class guy in Syrian culture to some kind of thing of beauty. It's part of the folly of fashion too, that clothes make the man, even if it's a caftan. Okay.
Melissa.
Yes, I'm so glad we've gotten onto the topic about the statement about art, because I thought it was a very complex statement, whatever the statement was. I mean, on the surface, it seems to be sort of the indictment of art as being a commodity and all the things that means. But when I really started thinking about it, I mean, Sam commodifying himself gave him far more freedom of movement and far more options than he would have had otherwise because of the circumstances he was born into. So on the one hand, we can say how dehumanizing it is for him to be a commodity. On the other hand, it's like, that's the way he got his humanity. That's the way he found the women. His only goal that we've been told about, was to reconnect with the woman he loves. And he couldn't do that as a human. He could only do that as a commodity. So it becomes a very interesting, I found myself midway through the movie going, wait, what's worse? I couldn't decide if it was, the fact that he could operate on these two planes, and at times he could make a choice which way he was going to go and which plane he was operating on, gave him far more flexibility to achieve his goals than he would have had as just a human. And so in a way, I wasn't sure if it was an indictment on art being commodified or if it was an indictment on how we're treating humans.
Well, I think he was learning to play the game. He was willing to endure a minor humiliation for a greater gain. So that's very capitalistic and very forward thinking. You know, the gains are later if you'll defer gratification. I'm glad you spoke up because I wanted to hear from you.
Sandy?
I don't think it was a minor humiliation. I mean, he was being sold, you know, he belonged to this person who was the highest bidder, who bought him to then put him on exhibit. So I don't think it was a minor humiliation. I think, and I don't know that he was aware when he entered into this bargain that that's what would happen to him. But, and I wasn't quite clear in the end how he got away from that because he had been bought by this other
Well, but
person.
he had a certain amount of freedom. The contract saved him and he learned how to play
Yeah.
it, play his power. You know, he could refuse to appear. And yeah, the lawyer came and threatened him.
Right, right.
But they needed his cooperation. And, you know, he like became a star in a way, not an overbearing, preening, you know, self-important star, but he had one thing in mind: what will bring me closer to this woman?
Right.
You know, which is why he even acceded to her demand to loosen up the pressure on her husband.
And I was kind of surprised that she actually left her husband and then ended up with him in the
That's
end.
a bit of a surprise. She's kind of a cipher, and we don't know.
Right.
You know, they didn't open up that side of the story.
But
That would
I
have been
think
a bit far to go.
Yeah.
It
I
would
thought
have
she
been.
married her husband because her mother basically said, this is the right man for you. And it was an arranged marriage. And so she did that, but then she left him, which
You know,
I thought
an
was a little
American
surprising.
film would have gone into that aspect of the story, but diluted Sam's side of the story.
Yeah.
You know, our focus just stays with Sam. I think Rosalind has something.
Yeah, hi, Jim, is it okay to talk about the end?
Not yet.
Okay, I'll come back. I'll be back.
Well, it's 8:25. Give us 10 minutes, okay?
Okay, call on me. Bye.
Natalie, unmute yourself.
I want to talk about the pimple.
Okay.
And I thought that was terrific because to me, what the pimple was saying was, this cannot last. This stupid form of art where people are going to buy a man from $5 million and stick him in the corner of their house.
I think you're absolutely right. It's an intrusion into the myth that this art is eternal.
Right.
Now, it's a living thing, and you got to deal with its deterioration. It's very funny. I mean, and they make such a big deal of it. You know,
I'll
there's
agree
this shot,
with you on that. Yeah.
there's this image through the magnifying glass of the surgeon or the doctor, whatever. It's hilarious. It's like they're all, you know, paying so much attention to this, what would be a minor thing. It's just, it goes along. I wanted to point out, every time we go into something funny, there's opera music. Opera is meant for ridicule in this movie. And it's because opera is associated with high, unassailable art. And they're using this for comedy. The first time he goes to get tattooed, the whole process is orchestrated with opera music.
That's
and
right.
Other times, it's hilarious. He's making fun of the preposterousness of is making fun of the preposterousness of the whole process. It's very wise and knowing.
I just want to say, Jim, that I found it impossible to find any of it funny. I saw that it was funny.
I agree.
I saw that it was funny on a cerebral
It's sarcastic.
level.
Okay, I'll say sarcastic.
I could see all of the jokes and all of the humor, etc., but I couldn't feel. All I could feel was that the dehumanization and the pain of refugees and of people who are in trouble, who will do anything, who are so desperate for whatever it is that they are willing to engage in this. And I just couldn't get there.
Well, you know what?
I agree with
Fern and Natalie, the director would embrace your comments.
Yeah.
She would just love it. She's like, oh my God, these two people got it. You know,
yes. Okay.
you know, it's like the rest is just whatever. You know, but this is the substance of the film.
I had a comment to make about the pimple that we were talking about, unless someone else is first. I think that's was there to again show the difference between art and humanity. Humans are, no one's perfect. We all have our beauty marks or other things or faults. We're not perfect, but art can be made perfect in final, the abstract, whatever. And therefore they are taking a human, flaw, you might say, or mark, a pimple, and removing it so it would be a perfect work of art.
Yeah, but in a way, this is an attack against Jeffrey as the artist for obsessing so much about this minor flaw. Remember, he takes it very seriously too. Like, it's how can you oh my God, this is my art, this is my child, his skin. It's like it's not Sam's skin, it's his child because it's his art. He conceived of the tattoo, therefore, the human being has less of it. I mean, Jeffrey comes away pretty cleanly in this film as a gateway to Sam's liberation, but he doesn't escape skewering, when it's convenient for the director. Not as consistent, he's not heroic for Jeffrey, but it's okay.
Before you get to the ending, I did want to say something, and there are plenty of attorneys on this line to notice it. But one of the things I've been dealing with in my work, I'm a divorce lawyer, is dealing with people who are selling images now, and these images have a value, but they're just
family images, Fern.
No, they're that. For example, a photographer no longer just sells the photo; they sell the image. It's called an NFT, and they sell. And those have huge value. An article came out today in LA Lawyer, I think, about these selling concepts. It's really the concepts that are selling, not the actual physical,
right.
Not the actual physical thing. So this is particularly prescient.
Right, it is. It's speculative financing. The value is based upon what somebody else will think of it a week from now or a month from now.
Right.
And the Bitcoin
that's inspiring if you're an artist and you're in the real world in Hollywood. But as a family person, you have to think about family. But then you want to leave a legacy. There's so much to read into this when you're talking about. He played that role so well, Mr. Ruxin. He played his role, and in the end, but look at what we have to do in Hollywood in the film and contracts and how everything works with like Fern was saying about the photograph.
Jeffrey may have been a master manipulator, but I think in the end he was a mensch because he gave his slave the freedom. He says you're free. I mean, forgive my sarcasm, but really, if we're talking about who controls whom, he's a big enough person to say you're your own person. And since we're closing it out now, it's so interesting, the big, let's cut to the end because
hold on for a second. Art wants to weigh in on this.
I was only going to talk about the end. Of course, Jeffrey did it with profit in mind. He was able to create another copy of that of that artwork. And the beauty was that they committed this insurance fraud through a video which depicted something that wasn't real.
Right.
And this is another use of art to.
Right. It's a joke upon
the eye.
Yes.
Things are not what they seem. We thought he was shot in the head. No, he wasn't. It was
hilarious.
It was a fake.
We laughed at it. It's okay.
How did they get the skin on the wall?
Because it was grafted. It was a DNA.
It did a clone.
It was cloned. It was grown in a lab.
It was grown in a Petri cell, in a Petri dish.
So it's a joke upon everybody else. They created not a fraud, but an identical piece of skin from, so.
The miracles of modern science.
Right. And that's, so it's like, we have progressed to the point where we can even beat art because we can cheat through it.
Roz, Raybo, did you want to chime in about the ending now?
I really laughed when he said, I'm just going to have it lasered off. No big deal.
Right. Well, that is funny, but there's a film that you can see somewhere on the web. And Picasso creates a piece of art on glass, I think. And the filmmaker, a Frenchman, films it from the other side of the glass. And then they destroy the glass. So the art is gone. And what remains is valuable? The film.
Mhm.
It's the only record. So this is not a new idea. But the point is, it's just a joke on the art world, you know, in terms of what is meaningful and what is valuable.
Mhm.
I thought it was hilarious. The police get to donate it to a museum, but of course they donate the duplicate. Sam himself says, "Isn't it interesting that I had to die to live? I had to create the fake video in order to have a full human, loving life with someone." And that just knocked me out. They beat the system. And then doubling back, Sam says to Jeffrey, the system loves you, you know, so you're okay. You'll always be okay. And he says, yeah, but you know, the worst thing is being ignored. So Sam has a different set of values. He doesn't ever want to not be paid attention to. And for Sam, it's, I just want to be with this woman I love and put my arm around her shoulder in the silhouette of the archway.
There you go. There you go.
You know, and removing that tattoo is the ultimate Sam snubbing his nose at the art world. What you valued, I just destroyed. So take it. I've got my life. I've got everything that I hoped for. So I thought this was, to sum it up, I thought this was a warm movie. Granted, it didn't wear its simple emotions on its face, but it was all about love and getting the girl at the end. Excuse me, for a woman, and you think that she was a minor player. It just was so back to basics that it was warm. And in a way, I forgive me for saying this, but I'm not surprised that a woman made this. I was astonished all the way through because it's such a clinical skewering of the art world. It's very cynical. She saw it all, but she also saw beyond it into what's it all about, what's meaningful. What did Alfie not realize in this movie, right? What it's all about is about feelings and people. And Sam did. So this film did not get the due it deserved or the viewing. And I think it's just because, you know, the cynics among us thought it was just another trendy film about the art world and tattooing, you know, and it was so much more for me. Anybody else want to chime in?
Steve Greenberg.
Oh, excuse me.
Yeah, I've been interested in this topic of the venality of the art world for decades, since I read a terrific book, which I'd recommend to everybody, about art forgery, written by Clifford Irving, who later became famous as the man who faked Howard Hughes's biography. And then Orson Welles made a movie about Irving's forgery, and the world's greatest art forger, Elmire de Hory. It's very, very interesting. But the ultimate villain in stories like this, or in this world, are the decadent rich audience, or the collectors who make this all possible. And it reminded me, there was a trend many years ago called dwarf tossing, where people in bars would toss dwarves to see how far they could throw them. And it sounds abhorrent, but the dwarves got money for it. And it was like, you know, one step away from prostitution, as I think Jim mentioned. So where does it become a crime or abhorrent, you know, and where is it of benefit to people?
Well, people make their own contracts with the devil, you know.
Right. And this was a good contract. Right.
Yeah, it was a contract. Right.
Can I just say
Anyone
one more thing?
Yes, Sandy and then Art.
Speaking about art, so I heard, I think it was an NPR this week I heard, they found an Andy Warhol drawing that hadn't been seen before.
What is that?
Anyone else hear this piece? So what they did is they had a computer create copies of it, identical copies, that they then distressed to make it look like the original. So you couldn't tell which was the original, which were the copies. And they sold them, I think, for like $250 a piece. And you didn't know if you were buying a copy or the original. And no one knows which is the original. So what is the value of a piece of art? You know, is it the knowing it's original, or is it just having it? It was a really interesting piece.
That's what she's saying with this film. Is that
Right.
the real value isn't where you think it is.
Art, did you have something you wanted to add?
I just wanted to mention that they went back to Raqqa, Syria, and I don't know when this movie was actually made, but Raqqa was totally destroyed by US related forces during the Syrian war. And I don't know whether that was taken into account by the author and the director of the movie. They went back to a place and had an seemingly idyllic life, but I wonder whether it lasted.
Well, come on.
Art, they acknowledged that by saying, he said, I'm going to some town that used to be called Raqqa. It's my home, because it had already.
Yeah.
So maybe this occurred after the bombing took place.
Well, he says he doesn't care who controls it. The point is he can be anonymous there and be himself.
Well, it wasn't a matter of control. I wondered whether they survived the bombing. I don't know when they got
We don't
there.
write the script ahead of the film. It's like that's conjecture at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Ruxin, for this film.
I'm so glad you all liked it. You know, it's like I have heard complaints from, I believe, nobody here that my programming choices are too dark and not fun enough. And believe me, I'm strong enough to resist that call. But
that's not true.
I mean, you know, a happy film, what's there to talk about? You know, it's these meteor films that you know, provoke us to wonder and engage ourselves in our backgrounds and our different perceptions of them. This is what it's all about, and why I think our group is held up for 4 years like this. Now, that said, I'm not going to, you know, be only a gloom and doomer. So a week from tonight, we're going to see a lovely film that will please you to no end. And I'm sorry, the people I believe who complained are not on board tonight, but I don't know who they are. I just heard through the grapevine that some people, which probably means some means about two, said, can't we see happier, more fun films? We're going to see A Brilliant Young Mind. It's a British film about a math savant who's in his teens and learns the meaning of love. And Sally Hawkins, who was in Maudie, we discussed Maudie about the artist. Remember, we love that so much. Yeah. And she was in Shape of Water. She's just a wonderful actor. And the young man is played by Asa Butterfield. And he's been in many films since then. This is about a 4 or 5-year-old film. He's grown up into a young adult. And his progress and her staying with him as a loving single mother is just remarkable. I'm going to write this in an email to all of you, but it's the only film I've ever seen where I cried before the main titles and just before the end titles. It's like, it's so precious, and you'll just love it because it's a triumph of emotional filmmaking. You know, it's not exotic, it's not fantastic, it's not a thriller. But Sally Hawkins gives a definition of love that will knock you out for the rest of your life. And I'm not going to reveal what it is, but it's connected to math. So you're going to love it. It's on Amazon Prime. It's a week from tonight, not 2 weeks, because Thanksgiving weekend is 2 weeks from tonight, and I wouldn't dare intrude upon anyone's holiday. You know, go have fun with your families and spread the word. And if you have cause to speak to people about our programming, let them know you love the rich, complex stuff.
We'll let them know that it's very depressing, but we all love it.
Yeah, tell them I'm like Mary Poppins for Reformed Judaism. Okay.
Love it.
Hey, Jim,
thank you very much.
Thanks, Jim.
Okay, thanks to everybody.
Do you have these?
See you soon.
Any night besides Saturday?
Next Saturday, Sandy. I hope you can join.
Do you have any nights besides Saturday?
Well, occasionally we do a Wednesday night, but that's on the rare side. I'm sorry if it's a difficult situation.
I don't know. By the way, we never mentioned to the Saturday group, I don't know if any or all of you watched the movie about the Civil War and listened to the professor speaking. It was a remarkable event. It was remarkable.
Tell people about the movie and then the professor.
The movie was about Jews on both sides of the aisle, as we now say, who were serving in the various armed services fighting during the Civil War. And it was eye-opening to see the Jews' role in fighting in the Confederacy and fighting to keep slavery going, and all the way from minor characters to Judah Benjamin, who was one of the most influential Confederates besides Jefferson Davis. And it was a very interesting film to see. And even more interesting was the professor who spoke about it and knew everything about every Jew, I think, who has ever lived in history. I mean, no matter what anybody asked, he had long, wonderful stories about it. And it was pretty shocking. It was really, because we like to think about, how we're on the right side of history, but
Jews are on all sides of history.
Are on all sides of everything.
I've said this before, and Fern, you brought it out. We had we saw the movie Phoenix about the husband who betrayed his wife to the Nazis. And you talked about Jews who betrayed other Jews during the Holocaust. And I just popped out of my mouth and said, Jews are people too. And but the irony of the Civil War is that with the tradition of slavery in Jewish heritage, for Confederate Jews not to see the irony of defending slavery is astonishing. And I don't think even in our discussion with Jonathan Sarna, the professor from Brandeis and a noted historian, I don't think we ever really nailed that, how that was possible. So I go to my default position of saying, Jews come in all colors and sizes.
I think it was that Upton Sinclair said, and he was quoted by Al Gore in his movie, basically, it is very difficult to teach someone something that is in their financial best interest not to learn. And hence, the business people who were making money off the slave trade, off cotton, who wanted to get along with their neighbors so they could continue to sell their wares, had no interest in hearing about slavery or racial segregation being inappropriate.
A sad fact. It doesn't explain anti-vaxxers or anti-maskers. But, Britain outlawed slavery before we did, before the Civil War.
Yeah.
And the Judaism in England at that time was Orthodox. So you'd think they'd have an even greater empathy about slavery than we did, and they did. But somehow and the Judaism in the States was mostly Reform.
And the Judaism in the States was mainly, as he pointed out, they were really barely, a lot of the Jews who were here were barely Jewish during that time. There were very few Jews, and they were intermarried. They were not extremely connected.
So it became a story of assimilation.
Yes.
And just so you know, I for Wilshire Boulevard Temple, I hosted a teen meeting last night, Friday night, for the teen group. We had 7 or 8 kids. And I showed them Marshall, which is a very Jewish Black story. We saw it in our group, where Chadwick Boseman plays Thurgood Marshall and Josh Gad plays Sam Friedman, who's a Jewish lawyer who doesn't want to get involved in saving a Black man unjustly accused of rape. And where I tried to steer the discussion towards with these kids was assimilation is a powerful force. And when you want to get along and seem like the rest, you can turn your eyes on your own heritage. And we're going to continue that in the discussion Wednesday, but it's such an important issue. How much of your identity is Jewish and how much of your identity is an assimilated American? It's an issue that I think we would do well to be mindful of continuing in our lives as identifying Jews and staunch Americans. So leave you with that. But we try, so this came out as Sandy's question. That was our last Wednesday night meeting, and it was really terrific. We had over 50 people on board, and it was much appreciated by people. We'll try and do that again, but apart from the Saturday night crowd, we worry about attracting enough people on Wednesday nights. So we save special events for that. But who knows, it may change once we come back into in-person. And the plan, by the way, is to have in-person screenings at University Synagogue and the chapel again. We don't know what time, but because we've merged, we have the resources to pay for security, and we can have evening screenings and afternoon screenings. We're not limited to Sunday mornings. So that's in our future, but it's all up to the Delta variant and other forces that are beyond our control, but that's in our future. And that'll be great.
First.
What?
Remodeling first.
Believe me, the chapel will be the last to get remodeled, but we'll see. But Fern's on the board of the merged synagogue, and I'm sure she'll fight the good fight for movies every night of the week. Okay, thanks for attending. We'll see you 1 week from tonight, A Brilliant Young Mind on Amazon Prime.
Thank you. Good night.
Night.
Bye, everybody.
Jim, hang on for a sec.
Okay, I'm not leaving.